Hi, how y'all doing?
Good.
Uh,
How are
yeah,
you?
I'm doing pretty good. I thought it was going to be Zooms and I was going to have my background and all of that, but I'm here. I made it. Hey,
I
Judge, how are you?
I doubt.
I think I don't know if you could do. I think you could do the green background with this. I'm not sure. I never tried it.
It's okay. We won't
Okay.
get through this.
So you emailed me your bio, and then when I glanced at it, I was like, "Oh wow!" I'm gonna I'm gonna introduce some of the bio, but you could definitely, speak to your activities. I think better than me. But welcome, Dr. Carmen Johnson. I'm glad you're here. I do know of you. You've been on Judge O'Brown's show a few times, and so I kind of followed your story. So, but I wanted to introduce you to my audience, Dr. Carmen Johnson. And how about you introduce yourself? Actually, let me just read this because you hold a PhD in philosophy, a scholar in metaphysics, the science of the mind, and mental science. You also hold a certification as a paralegal, having undertaken extensive studies in the criminal justice domain. And you are currently pursuing certifications as an American with Disabilities legal advocate, unwavering in the face of past injustices. You served on numerous boards and committees, including a Council of Court Excellence, American Bar Association, National Bar Association, the United Nations, and you sat on Congressional Advisory Board for Congressman Glenn Ivey, and you focus on reentry. So, welcome. And how about you just formally introduce yourself?
I mean, you pretty much said it. I think you missed the part that I'm a lobbyist and I write legislation, and my main focus nowadays is justice reform. That's not what I started out in life as interested in doing, but here we are today. So that's the focus in my life now.
So, being a lobbyist, can you elaborate a little bit and explain to the audience exactly what a lobbyist does? What do you do?
So what I do with my nonprofit, because I'm a lobbyist registered under Helping Ourselves to Transform, my interns and I, we write sound draft legislation, and we go find sponsors, state senators, state delegates, in order to sponsor our bill, in order to get our legislation passed.
Any recent legislation you have on the
Yeah,
on
we Yeah, we're getting ready to get a piece of legislation signed into law, and it's called Maryland Fair Taxation for Justice Involved Individuals. And basically, it deals with people that are impacted by the justice system, and they are, when they come home, they owe taxes, and they have interest and penalties and fees, and they was audited without them knowing it, and things of that nature. So this piece of legislation, it really sings to professionals and even elected officials and business owners and stuff like that that have financial issues when they come home, like, regular people that find themselves behind the wall. They don't, a lot of them don't have to deal with that type of stuff, but professionals, they find people that have worked in corporate America and find themselves behind a wall, they have to deal with taxes and stuff like that. And everyone has said, Dr. Johnson, I never heard of that. I said, well, I mean, my interns and I, we think out the box, and we're trying to help everyone that is exposed to the system. And last year we had the in custody death, and that was for the state of Maryland. That was signed into law last year, and then we are already getting started on our new draft piece of legislation for 2026.
That's great. So, would you mind telling us your unique story? the situation that you had found yourself in, and where you're at now?
Well, the judge always liked to cut me off because I guess I don't be telling it right. But at the end of the day, I'm the former housing chair for the state conference in NAACP, and I was lawfared back in 2011, and it went all the way through up to actually now, to be exact. And at that particular time, back then, that's when all the foreclosures was happening all around the country, all around the world. And because I was the housing chair for the state conference in NAACP of Maryland, I was all over the news, trying to get a moratorium to freeze the foreclosures, because everyone knows that people of color, they say that brother, that man, he doesn't want to marry the woman of color. Well, these were families. These were mothers, fathers, children. And for me, it was just too heart-wrenching. It was like, I had to do something about it, which was try to get the moratorium to freeze the foreclosures in the state of Maryland. Fortunately, I did get the moratorium. However, I did not get the photo op because by that time I was, on my way to trial and ultimately arrested at trial and sent off to jail. It was a horrific moment in my life, a horrific time in my life. When I believed in our government, I believed in everything that they stood for. And I never had a reason to think about crime or jail or prison or police or or anything like that. Like you just don't think about stuff like that and until it's too late. And it was too late, because by the time that happened to me, my family didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do, and it was just an absolute disaster. Not to mention, even though I heard the story of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Assata Shakur and Professor Angela Davis, like I heard all of those stories. But, in the back of my mind, did it really happen or did it really not happen? Even though I believed them per se, but I wasn't there until that shit happened to me. And I was like, oh my God, this is real. This is what they do to Americans. This is what they do to innocent people. And it's really unfortunate. And for years, I thought that I was the only one. And then when I came home, after spending 3 years at a prison camp, I realized that this was the norm. This was happening more than what I thought. I just never heard of it because I didn't care. It wasn't my problem. And but now it's my problem. It's my problem every single day. It's my problem. I see it in my community and I do something about it, And so what I can say is I don't want to go through that again, nor do I want to see any innocent person put in jail. I don't think that that's fair. I don't think it's right. And if you can beat me, why do you have to cheat me?
I like that slogan. Yeah. And I love that saying. It makes sense. And it's true because, so listen, given your background, when you talk about lobbying, getting laws passed, you really are fighting for, number one, the American people and, people in your community, which just so happen to be Black Americans. And I think a lot of your policies will help marginalized groups as well. Just speak to the importance of public policies, because I think when we talk about Americans, we get so wrapped up in the headlines and social media and national news or national elections to where we forget about what's going on in our backyard, where we live at on a local level. So speak to the importance of public policies locally and how that really affects our everyday lives.
Well, what makes Maryland unique, and I can't speak about any other state in the country, but what makes Maryland unique is the fact that it's right beside Washington, D.C. And everything happens in Washington, D.C. in terms of policy and things of that nature. And, and then what our elected officials, our state elected officials, our county elected officials, our our mayors and things like that. Most of us regular people, we have their cell phone numbers. We can go and knock on their doors, and we know, we can walk up in their office and stuff like that. And everyone's been knowing everyone for years and years and years. And so is when you have that close knit like that, it's no excuse for regular people to not take advantage of knowing who their elected officials are, because the doors are open here in Maryland for you to walk up in there anytime, or to call them, or go to a town hall and see them and ask them questions and things of that nature. But it's very important for our community to be more involved with what's happening in public policy, in civic engagement, in social engagement, because there's so much that our people that look like us are being affected. And so we don't have the luxury anymore. I mean, years ago, we didn't have the luxury to just go hang out at a restaurant or go hang out at the club or anything like that. We don't have that luxury anymore. The way that they are killing our youth, the way that they are gunning us down, the way that they are doing these things, the way that they are arresting people so easily, we don't have the luxury. We need to know who our elected officials are right in our backyards. We also need to know what the law is. We need to know what are the laws in our state. We need to know what the state laws are, what the federal laws are, just in case. And even here in Maryland, I think it was a piece of legislation. It was a piece of legislation that was passed last year, signed into law by the governor, and we protest about it. But of course, it was signed into law, where it will allow 10 to 13-year-olds to be arrested. And so, it just horrified me, because I was thinking, God, when I was 10 years old, I didn't have a thing on my mind. I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea. And our children don't have the luxury of that anymore. And so we have to know who our elected officials are. We have to, be at these rallies. We have to be going door to door when legislation sessions start January, all the way until April. We have to, know what legislators are voting for a piece of legislation and which ones are not. We have to know all of these people, because we're in dangerous times, and our children don't have the right anymore to be children. And it's really unfortunate.
Right, because a lot of people think that, I feel as though a lot of people believe, because I see it by their actions, if they are part of the Democrat Party or even Republican Party, it doesn't matter. I'll just leave it up to the people who I elected into whatever office, whether it's a judge, sheriff, or a congressperson, or mayor, or governor, or even presidency. But I think what people need to understand is, no, whoever you elect into office, no matter what party affiliation, you have to stay on top of them and monitor. Okay, what are you doing? This is the agenda that we need for this community. What plans do you have? Like, we really have to stay on top of these elected officials. Would you agree?
I agree, but I got sidetracked because I'm looking at TLC Carol. He says, "Don't break the law; you will never go to jail." Trust me, I didn't break a law, statute, or code, and it's a lot of people that are out here that have not broken any statutes or codes or laws, and they find themselves behind the wall. And I remember once upon a time when I used to think just like you, and sir.
By the way,
Yes, sir.
I want to get into your book.
So that you're right, but
That'll cover what you just got asked about, not breaking the law. Don't do the crime if you can't do the time. That wasn't what happened with you.
Nope.
No, it wasn't what happened with her. But I always, maybe I should have mentioned this to you ahead of time. Don't really read the comments.
Okay. Because I'm getting
that's people's. What's that? The First Amendment right? That's the freedom of whatever. And then the comments doesn't stay up. So yeah. But anyway, you want to get into her book?
Yeah, that addresses the question that just
Right.
came up on the comments. This book, it's called The Pretense of Justice, and I wrote the foreword for it. It's a very interesting book. I read the transcript of the trial proceedings. I was rather astonished at what I read because at first I just took this as another somebody lamenting the fact that they got caught. But that's not what happened with you. Now, what's going on is you were one of the early targets of what we now call lawfare. In other words, using the criminal justice system to accomplish economic, political, or social purposes rather than dealing with control of crime. Something that I really seldom ran into in my career was that the people that were the primary targets of the trial, they gave evidence that said you had absolutely nothing to do with this whole thing. They didn't even know you. But what seems to have happened, to give a little timeline for this, is in California there was a bank called One West Bank. There was a young woman who was aspiring to a political career, and she was running for a district attorney's office. There was a gentleman, and I'm being polite about this, who was heavily invested in the banking and mortgage industry. And he came up with a bank known as One West Bank. His CEO for that bank, his name was Mnuchin. He was with the Obama administration and spent 1 year with the Trump administration. The person that was behind this bank financed a number of district attorneys in terms of their elections all around the country, including where you were back in Maryland. And this particular youthful young woman who was running for district attorney of San Francisco turns out to be Kamala Harris. The person that was assisting her and financing her was George Soros. Well, George Soros on the West Coast got in a little bit of a mess with his investments because his bank and his CEO were subject to, I think, 5,200 plus counts of indictment in just about every county in California. Well, his girl wound up being sponsored through a lot of money being channeled in her direction, and she became Attorney General for the state of California. She consolidated all of his cases and dismissed them. And he sold his bank for $3.6 billion a few weeks after all these indictments were dismissed. And Mnuchin went on to his administrative career in politics for at least a couple of presidents. Now, meanwhile, back where you were, it seems that the governor of Maryland at the time had heavily invested in the same kind of, shall we say, mortgage bundling opportunities. And his niece was an assistant U.S. attorney, and you started exposing him. And with from what I can read from the record, and I've been doing this as long as anybody out there has. It's been more than 50 years. And frankly, I couldn't see any reason at all for any matter of criminal law being focused on you other than the fact that you were exposing these projects of George Soros that dealt with mortgage bundling. That was through your NAACP committee thing. What happened is some years before that, you had volunteered to restore credit for a lot of ordinary people, and it just happened that one or two of the people out of, what was it, 1,500 or so you helped, something like that?
Over 5,000 people.
5,000 people. One or two of them happened to be involved in this thing that the feds had targeted. And what all you had done is assisted these couple of individuals to get their credit restored, and that had been years before. That was something you volunteered to do. So the assistant U.S. attorney decided that she was going to get rid of you so you weren't such a problem and causing embarrassment. And they brought you in on this case. And the other parties to this case gave evidence that you had nothing to do with what they were doing, and that they didn't even know you, other than this come in with a community service you'd volunteered to do. Now, the judge was a black judge, federal judge, but it was his first trial, and he basically didn't know what the devil he was doing. And he went along with allowing Homeland Security to prosecute you, which let them, on their declaration, get you held incommunicado, so you could not communicate with anyone. Something happened. You got out of prison early. And it seems that you got out of prison early because they were doing a sting on this facility, and they found that a certain inmate had been getting transported to emergency room services every week or so. And it was for heat prostration. And it turned out the inmate was getting tortured. The torture, I think, well, let's put it this way. I won't go into the gory details, but they're in your book. You got put in a small cubicle and heat lamps got turned on until you passed out. And that was being done until they were trying to get you to recant your accusations. But when they discovered that that was you that was getting literally tortured, you got out. And you've been dedicated to doing something about the situation. And also, they seized $3.5 million and other assets from you, if I'm not mistaken, back when. And the affidavit that the U.S. Attorney's Office filed said, although these funds have nothing to do with the instant crime, it may develop that in the future there are criminal activities with which they have a connection. So it's been, what, 12, 15 years, and there's been no connection found, but you still haven't got your money back. And that thing you just got through talking about tax problems for those who just got out, even though the government had seized your money, IRS was saying you were delinquent in paying taxes on them, that money every year. So
Not
you
that
got a
money.
huge,
Not that money. That money was clean.
oh
That,
yeah, other peripheral money.
yeah, that was taxes was paid. It was just sitting in the business bank account for years.
Yeah, well, other funds while you were locked up, they were talking about you were delinquent on that. But people have been getting a little bit, shall we say, freaked out when they found out what happened to you, or find out what happened to you in that mortgage bundling scam that Soros and others on both sides of the country were involved in, and DAs trying to help him out, which is the problem. And the early example of lawfare used against you, violation of due process, fundamental fairness, everything else, basically to get you to shut up and back off of exposing what became the obvious scandal when we found about these mortgages getting bundled and fraud in foreclosing. So you've been overcoming that. And if anybody wants to see an example of courage and fortitude, they need to get your book and read it, because it's deep. And people have been reading that book, and they've been involving you in criminal justice reform. They've been involving you in preventive measures, and generally taking advantage of your expertise to basically make things happen. So the Republican Party is interested in you. The Democratic Party is saying, oh my God, we got to make up for what we did to her. And, so everybody's kind of trying to bring you in as the resident expert, so to speak, on what happens when criminal justice goes way wrong.
Can you pull up her book?
That's just a summation. I just kind of acted like your lawyer and summing it up for the jury.
Can you hold up her book?
I did. Here you go.
Tell us the name of it.
It is called The Pretense of Justice.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, it was backwards. There you go.
Yeah, I had changed the mirroring. Okay.
All right. So it's a pretty good book. And anybody out there, if you want to see how far this can go and what we were talking about, have been talking about, Dana and I, when we were getting into Fannie and Letitia and Fox and Bragg and Smith and all of that crazy bunch up there that are going around doing what we have been styling lawfare. I wrote the foreword. I've been aware of this book and the circumstances for what is it now? About 8, 9 years, 7, 8 years?
It's been about 5, 6 years, going on
5
6 years,
years.
somewhere
Yeah.
around there, because I've been home 7 years. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
I think I had you on this show I do with Valerie Denise. That's where we started talking about this the first go around, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway,
That's where I heard about Dr. Carmen Johnson on the show you do with Valerie Denise as well. I'm going to
by
pin.
the way, George Soros bought up 400 plus blog talk radio stations on iHeart. And Valerie Denise and I can't do that anymore because Soros kicked off ourselves and anybody else that was conservative trying to control the narrative. So there is that same thing. He hasn't stopped. He wants to parasitically come in here and start sucking the blood out of the country with what he's been doing with what I'm know you might not want to say anything that way right now, but I'll call it what it is just outright scamming the American public and trying to control the process and own whoever he chooses to own that would initiate it against good people.
Well, this is why I wanted when you first came out, Dr. Johnson, to talk about, for you to talk about you being a lobbyist, the importance of public policies. Because if we understand the law, especially locally, what's going on, and a lot of times it's someone like what happened to you in your situation. See, these politicians or people in these powerful positions, they don't want to be exposed, and they don't want us, the regular public, to be educated in civics, and what's going on where we live at. Because if we start paying attention, then we're going to start seeing all of the dirt that they're doing, and corruption. It's a lot of corruption that is going on, and that's why it is important for people to locally pay attention to what's going on locally, especially with these public policies that they pass. Anything else you want to say?
They need to also, the community, they need to be up on what legislation is up to be testified on, and is up to be voted on, and things of that nature. And then you got to go further than that. Then you got to print out the language, and then you got to go through it, because a lot of times they had certain pieces of language into a bill that has nothing to do with that piece of legislation. And so, again, we just don't have the luxuries anymore to just be laid back and partying and hanging out. We really have to be focused on, ourselves, our families, our communities, and we have to start holding others accountable for what they do to us. But if we don't know law, we don't know, we don't know what legislation is out there. If we don't know any of those things, you can't say nothing.
And why should somebody get involved? Answer: because just having an association casually, business, social, charity, doesn't make any difference. Somebody may be the target of lawfare because the people that are in a position to pursue them are doing wrong themselves, and you can get caught up in it just because you have a minor association with them, just a casual one. Somebody walked in your business, somebody you did tax for, somebody that you represented, somebody that you worked on their teeth for. Anything like that could get you caught up in there, and you could have sheer living hell, your finances stripped from you, your liberty taken away from you, your dignity taken away from you, and they try to destroy you. And you and I have talked a lot, and I know what you have expressed over the years. And it's gotten better, but I mean, what they did to you was pretty awful. I mean, very seldom have I ever seen anybody in the system get treated like they treated you, just downright torturing you like you were some kind of so-called terrorist, and then bringing in Homeland Security so they could keep you incommunicado and basically in solitary confinement before you even got convicted. So I mean, it was just absolutely horrible. And by
Well,
the way, if anybody,
isn't that isn't that illegal
yeah,
to?
totally illegal, but they did it anyway because there's nobody over them. That's like we talk about with Fannie Willis talking about they're picking on her. And as we continually observe, who picked on you? You had nobody over you but your citizens who voted you in. So you didn't have to get anybody's okay when you signed off on what Wade got. You didn't have to get anybody's okay about where the money got spent. You didn't have to get anybody's okay about what crimes you charge people with. And you could go off and charge people for RICO for just ordinary First Amendment protected political activity. Or you didn't like what they were saying in a rap song. Or you didn't like a teacher's credit union. See, that's down in Atlanta, but you, Doc, were in Maryland, and they got you just because some years before this happened, out of 5,000 people that you helped get their credit restored, 2 people that they ultimately went after wound up getting you brought in, and they didn't have a shred of evidence. Not, I looked through that, and there was not one shred of evidence that connected you with anything other than having helped 2 of these people restore their credit several years before. And that's just a travesty. And if anybody needs motivation to get involved with this kind of thing, this is it.
I have a question. So, public policies, when you are working with legislation, state level, right? How long does it actually take to get a law passed or public policy passed? Like how long and how much effort do people need to put into that?
Well, so for me and my interns, every year for the last few years, we've been getting legislation passed because that's how good we are. And we get started early. So like, for example, legislation session ends April the 8th, which is, I think is Saturday or something like that. And so we get started. And so our next piece of legislation is going to help women that are victims of domestic violence and who are still behind the wall, who have received more time than their victim, than their abuser. And a lot of times the man that has abused her, he may get 7 or 8 years and she may get 20, right? And so we are putting together a pilot program that will bring women home that are victims of domestic violence and their abuser got less time to them, or the abuser got no time. And so we figure we get started in April. We start pushing out the draft legislation to state senators and delegates in Maryland. And it may take us to probably by August, we should have sponsors for the legislation. But, my nonprofit, my interns and I, we are known to have innovative legislation, stuff that people don't even think about because everybody is so busy. They all are stuck in one box and they all are thinking alike. But we always get legislation or create draft legislation that's totally different. And so, they have no choice but to pass it. And then, of course, we have to go through the process of going back and forth with the legislative people that are in Annapolis. And that's usually tedious because a lot of times, a lot of the language is watered down, or, we end up with some other pieces in there that we initially didn't want in there. So it's like a negotiation. So we'll probably start negotiations like September, October. And then January 6th or whatever, 2026 will be when legislation sessions start up again. So from January to April. And so that we usually we get our stuff passed.
So you,
Doc, how you like doing projects with these students about justice reform?
I love it, but we also, work with students that are taking up sociology, psychology, human services, communications, journalism, public policy, public relations, all different areas of law, from international law, corporate law, criminal law. Like we all. My focus is on the youth, the young people that are our future leaders, because I want to be in that wheelchair and be able to call little Johnny at the White House when I'm, 90 years old and say, hey, send the president plane to come get me. And, I want to come and have dinner at the White House. And so, I have, created leaders with probably about 45 interns in the last few years, and I can absolutely call them for anything. And they are all absolutely amazing. And I don't think I know everything. It's times when they have to save me, and it's times when I have to save them. And they are probably the only people on this planet that I trust, and that's my interns.
Well, let's see. You've got an eclectic mix. I think they're bi-coastal. You have them at Howard University Law School. You have some at my
You
old
see,
alma mater, UCLA Law School. You're working closely with all of them on a
around the
lot of
country.
so
legislators are approaching you about getting legislative reform. And by the way, I do highly commend you to the current administration about getting pardoned. If anybody deserves it, it's you.
I know, Judge, you always talk about a pardon, and I know you tell me don't say this, but I don't want a pardon. I want a full investigation into what happened to me. And the thing is, they want to hold us accountable for things that we did do and things that we didn't do. And people need to know. I need to understand, who was it that hated me that much. I mean, I have my suspicions, but who hated me that much where they wanted to send a woman humanitarian, a Buddhist of over 30 years, to a jail, prison camp, and cage, and then wanted her beat and all kinds of stuff. It's just a horrific thing. I'm asking for a full investigation into my case.
You deserve that. And by the way, I would suggest to you, and I've been talking to you about it, they're just callous. They don't care. If you're in the way, you get steamrolled. You're just a nuisance. Bring in the bug spray. Get rid of somebody because you don't want something buzzing around your picnic. And that's what they kind of did to you. Just total callousness. And what is it I tell you all the time? The Bill of Rights exists to prevent what happened to you, but people ignore it, and there seems to be a move afoot to just completely forget about that Bill of Rights. I find it interesting to contrast some little privileged, pampered poodles who were on spring break, and they were being questioned about U.S. trivia. How many amendments are in the Bill of Rights? One said 3, one said 13, one said 19. What's the Second Amendment? Oh, isn't that the one that gives you the right to vote? Okay, who did the colonists fight during the Revolutionary War? Spain, France, Germany? Those were the answers they came up with. What is this one about being free from search and seizure? Huh? I guess, they don't care. They don't perceive themselves as being subject to this kind of thing, but it is so easy to become not only subjected to such, but to be actually truly victimized and exploited by such things. And people just don't pay attention, but they need to read your book so they get it. And all of these folk that, out there, that have lived in ivory towers, that write these books that the woke folk like to quote all the time. I've read some of them, and frankly, most of them just don't get it. They are interesting tomes of theory, but they don't deal with real world practicality. And the people that are involved, for the most part, haven't had much real world experience, but you have.
So I want to ask you one last question. If you are a regular person, let's say such as myself, and it's something where you live at that you need changed or improved or worked on, right? Public policy or even a law. Uh, should people, what is the first step that someone should do? Like, is it okay? So if I want to go to my representative who represent that district, should I come with like, how do you call it? Like a petition, like a list of names in that community saying, we all signed this for this specific public policy to be passed or this agenda to be presented for you to, work on. This is something that we need. Like, do you accumulate signatures in your community and then you present it to your representative, whether it's city council or state representative for your district, attached with an agenda?
So with the way that my interns and I do, we go ahead and we do all the research first. We do all the research and then we put together the draft legislation that we want to see. And then we go in and then we secure our sponsors. So we kind of do it backwards, but that's the way my mind thinks anyway. I don't think like normal people. And then we get our sponsors and then we start advocating to the community, letting them, because I already know that what my interns and I put together is boss, right? And so once we get our sponsors, the senators and the delegates to sign off on it, then that's when we go and start, recruiting the community to testify in person or give written testimony when the time comes and things like that. Because what here in Maryland, people, some people don't like to do the work. So they'll go and they'll take your stuff. And then you turn around and be like, what happened? They done took your stuff. So for me, I like to secure those sponsors first before I really go public. But
you say take your stuff. You mean take your policy idea?
Yeah.
Oh.
Some people can't think for themselves. So they your stuff. Yeah.
And you know what? I definitely want to have you come back on, and because I want to interview you with things of that nature, because I've actually know someone who experienced that. And I think people don't understand, because a lot of times that happens like in business, or if you're a content creator and people want to steal your content or your image or whatever, you don't think about that really happening when it comes to politics, local, national, doesn't matter. But I get it happens a lot, and it's like a common practice. So it's like protecting your work.
Yep. Protecting your work. But I want to thank you for having me on, you and the judge, and I appreciate you guys. And I look forward to coming back on your show to talk about public policy and things of that nature.
Yes.
Love you both. Thank you.
I will be in contact because I already have some ideas.
All right. Have a good evening.
I just wanted to boost your book because I'm so sick of reading garbage nonsense that people trying to pimp with.
Yes.
Yours is real and it's grounded on hard experience, and I think people really need to read it. And it's available, isn't it, on Amazon?
Yeah, I pinned the link in the chat. I'm gonna put it in the description. There's a couple of people I see in the chat. They say they just bought it, so it is pinned in the chat. So guys, please go and purchase Dr. Carmen Johnson book, The Pretense of Justice, Black and White. Dr. Carmen Johnson. So
one last question. I get this all the time. People say you should just go with the flow and, stop trying to rock the boat. Go along to get along so you don't have any trouble. Or would you say go full speed ahead and cause all the trouble you can trying to do right? Which
I'm,
would you?
as a Buddhist, I'm just trying to do what's right. So what's wrong if I'm sitting there and seeing things that are being done wrong to my people and to the community, and I'm just sitting there not doing anything because I don't want to rock no boats. I think that that's wrong, and I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. So I guess I would go with that second one that you said. Like, I mean, because right now, you and I are drafting a letter to the president of the United States, and I'm like, okay, they may try to kill me this time, but I can't worry about that.
It's an interesting thing about being able to sleep easily at night. Some people don't get that, and they have all kinds of trouble sleeping. And they have all kinds of guilt complexes and self hate because what are they doing? What is their purpose? Their karma is negative. But proud of you, so I want you back so we can just kind of turn it over to you and you can start giving us the latest spiel on what you're trying to do because you and I talk a lot and it's important you doing what you do. And you've been able to bring people in. See, you're not like Chicken George, Al Sharpton, Roly Poly, Chocolate Chip Cookie Mix, Martin. You are the real deal, and you can talk to people and you can get stuff done. They just run their mouth off and get a paycheck under the table or over the table, but you sit there and actually do something for the people. So I want you to tell folk next time all about that. You can run with it. I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, next time I'll be telling y'all how the president cologne smelt when I went to the White House.
Yeah, well, I'm helping you draft that letter.
All right. Talk to y'all later.
Thank you.
All right. Later on.